Hello, students. Welcome back to the second part of the speech delivered by Harold Pinter at the Nobel Prize Awards ceremony, Art, Truth, and Politics. In the previous part, we saw how Pinter attacked the United States of America for the way in which it lied its way to the position of the superpower of the world. It suppressed the truth and made everyone believe that whatever it was doing was for the good of humanity. It also highlighted the crimes committed by other nations, by Russia, by Germany. Through its stories, through the films that it made, the United States made sure that everyone knew about the crimes committed by the other nations, but its own crimes were always suppressed. Suppressed എന്ന് മാത്രമല്ല, it glorified whatever it did. ഏത് രാജ്യത്തെ attack ചെയ്യുന്ന സമയത്തും that was presented as a case of democracy being saved, freedom being protected, the welfare of the people being ensured. This is the way in which the United States powered itself to being the number one nation. And that is what you see in this in the two images on this slide, the way in which the United States has got control over the entire world without being questioned by anyone. So that was how the previous part ended with the sentence: the United States' actions throughout the world made it clear that it had concluded, it had carte blanche to do what it liked. Carte blanche is a French word which means a plain paper or a white card. Carte is card or paper, and blanche is plain or white. In other words, it's like having absolute freedom. വെള്ളപത്രം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്, like it has absolute freedom to do whatever it wants. It gives itself that freedom and nobody dares to question it. Pinter then points out the very clever manner in which America invaded other countries. It always avoided direct conflict or direct confrontation, direct invasion, because that would be noticed and it would be criticized. On the other hand, America entered those countries in a sly manner, and it described its presence as low intensity conflict. It means that it's not like dropping a bomb in the country and then attacking the country. അങ്ങനെയല്ല. On the other hand, it would go right into the heart of the country and establish itself, and then its presence would be asserted. അത് ഒരു cancerous growth മാതിരിയാണ് Pinter describe ചെയ്യുന്നത്. He says, you establish a malignant growth and watch the gangrene bloom. ഒരു ഗാംഗ്രീൻ, ഒരു അഗ്ലി ബോഡിലി മാനിഫെസ്റ്റേഷൻ മാതിരി ഈ ഒരു പ്രസൻസ്, ദി അമേരിക്കൻ പ്രസൻസ് ഗ്രോസ് ഇൻ ദാറ്റ് കൺട്രി. Ultimately, the United States would have controlled the entire population and established a rule by either the military or some of the great the corporations. So it would ensure that it was either a military or a capitalist government that was installed in those countries by ousting the democratically elected governments, most of whom were, of course, socialists. So, ലോകത്ത് പല രാജ്യത്തും അമേരിക്ക ചെയ്തത് ഇതാണ്. It would train the military or train the corporate sector to protest against the governments, the established governments. And ultimately, when all that had been done, when the people of the country would be made to believe that this is the best that can happen to us, America has come to protect us, എന്ന ഉള്ള ആ ഒരു കൺവിക്ഷൻ ഇവരുടെ ഈ നാട്ടുകാരുടെ ഉള്ളിൽ ഉണ്ടാവുന്ന സമയത്ത് അമേരിക്ക would go about, it would face the camera, it would face the press and say, we have saved democracy. So this is the US foreign policy. This has been the US foreign policy, and that is what Pinter attacks. He gives us the specific example of Nicaragua to prove this. In the first part of the speech, Pinter had, of course, spoken about Iraq and conveyed how the United States created a huge lie about the danger that Saddam Hussein was and the way in which he would unleash terror upon the world with his weapons of mass destruction. It was by making people believe this lie that they plundered Iraq for their own interests, of course. But everyone believed that lie, and Iraq was devastated. Now, Pinter talks specifically about another country, Nicaragua, a Central American nation, as you can see, situated between North America and South America, and also between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Now, Nicaragua was very much was of great interest to America because they had plans to construct a bridge that would connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And Nicaragua seemed the ideal um, country through which or over which they could construct such a bridge. For this and for various other reasons, they considered Nicaragua as a hotspot. Now, we'll just take a quick look at the history of Nicaragua to understand the US presence in Nicaragua in a clearer manner. Now, Nicaragua was a country that was colonized both by Spain and the United Kingdom or England. And it was only towards the end of the 19th century that the country began to build itself as an independent nation. And in this, they received considerable support from the United States. And from about the year 1909 or around that time, the United States was a dominant presence in Nicaragua. There were many Nicaraguans who hated the American presence in their country and resisted the control of America over Nicaragua. And chief among them was a leader named Cesar Augusto Sandino. Now, he led many movements against the conservative governments in Nicaragua, which were supported by the Americans. And it was in 1927 that he succeeded in driving the American soldiers out of Nicaragua. And he became the leader of the country. Now, he was a powerful leader and an extremely popular leader, very much like Che Guevara in Nicaragua, and who also had a very strong leftist leaning. Now, for all these reasons, America just hated this person, and they were looking for the earliest opportunity to overthrow him. And they kept training, people, conservative establishments to rebel against Sandino. And they succeeded. By the 1930s, they got Sandino assassinated, and they installed the Somoza family, the family of Anastasio Somoza Garcia, as the new leaders of Nicaragua. And this family continued to rule Nicaragua for many years, till late into the 1970s, and in a most dictatorial manner. Naturally, there were many uprisings against this family. The family was strongly supported by the United States because with this family in power, America could achieve whatever it wanted in Nicaragua. And one of the leaders who kept rebelling against this family was Chamorro, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, who was a follower of Sandino, and he was known as a Sandinista. So this leader was assassinated. Again, there was a strong American hand behind the assassination of this person. And then you have many groups, rebel groups in Nicaragua coming together, and they were trying to oust the family of the Somozas. And it was in 1979 that you have the ouster of Somoza. Then there was an effort in the country to rebuild itself under the new leader, Daniel Ortega. Now, he was also a left winger who was also a follower of the Sandinista policy. And again, since the United States, America could not tolerate this kind of a person in Nicaragua, they now trained a rebel group known as the Contras. They gave them arms, they gave them weapons, and they made the Contras a very strong rebel group against the Sandinista governments in Nicaragua. It was during the reign of the American President Ronald Reagan that the Contras received the maximum of support to create trouble in Nicaragua, and they kept creating problems for the elected government of Daniel Ortega. And ultimately, it was only with much pressure from other Central American countries that America decided to withdraw the Contras and to disband the Contras. And it was in return for another election. And during the election, Violet Barrios de Chamorro, she led an anti-Sandinista coalition and she defeated Daniel Ortega. But by 2006, Daniel Ortega was back in power, and he now is the president of Nicaragua. Now, this brief look at the country's history can tell us about the way in which its fortunes have been so much controlled by the Americans, and they have made life hell for the people of Nicaragua. Let us now come back to the text. Pinter tells us about a meeting that took place in London in the late 1980s. There was a delegation from Nicaragua, of which Pinter was a member, and the leader of that delegation was Father John Metcalf. There was an American delegation also. Now, this meeting was taking place at a time when the Americans were thinking of sponsoring the Contras even more. And the Nicaraguan delegation came to London to request the Americans to withdraw their support to the Contras, because the Contras were really plundering the nation and making life hell for the local people. So in that context, Father Metcalf said, he addressed the American leader, Mr. Raymond Sayes, who was a very powerful man in America. And Father Metcalf requested Raymond Sayes, he said, "Sir, I'm in charge of a parish in the north of Nicaragua. My parishioners built a school, a health center, a cultural center, and we've been living there in peace for a long time. But with the arrival of the Contra force, we are in trouble. A few months ago, a Contra force attacked the parish and they destroyed everything. The school, the health center, the culture center. They raped the nurses and the teachers, and they slaughtered the doctors in the most brutal manner. They behaved like savages, and Father Metcalf made a very strong plea that the US government should withdraw its support to this terrorist group." Now, Raymond Sayes listened to all this, and in a very calm manner, he just said, "Father, let me tell you something. In war, innocent people always suffer." Now, this was a shocking reply. Nobody expected the American leader to respond in this insensitive manner, as if it was no big deal at all. യുദ്ധമാണ്, അപ്പോൾ കുറേ ഇന്നസെൻ്റ് ആൾക്കാർ മരണപ്പെടും എന്ന്. It was a very insensitive remark that he made. The Nicaraguan delegation protested, and they said that the innocent people here were the victims of a gruesome atrocity subsidized by the American government. And if the American Congress allowed the Contras more money, then there would be further atrocities. Sayes again listened to it, and he remained unshaken. He said, "I don't agree with the facts that you have presented here. He refused to accept that the delegation's views or report as truthful. They could only, the delegation, the Nicaraguan delegation could only withdraw in silence. They had been unable or unsuccessful in making the Americans withdraw their support to the Contras. And Pinter tells us how, as he was leaving the embassy, there was an American American delegate who came up to him and, very excitedly told him, "I enjoy your place." Pinter says he just could not reply to that because, what he wants to convey is that if at all anybody enjoyed the kind or appreciated Pinter's plays, naturally that person would give some respect to justice, and therefore he just did not reply to that person. And it was around the same time that Reagan, President Ronald Reagan was going about making statements like this: "The Contras are the moral equivalent of our founding fathers." Now, the founding fathers were the Europeans who established the United States of America. ആ രാജ്യം ആദ്യമേ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, and they were inhabited by the native Indians. But then the Europeans came there and they invaded and they made the land their own. And the initial group of the leaders, the Europeans who settled down in America, they were known as the founding fathers. And they considered as a very special group of people. And here was President Reagan who said that the Contras in Nicaragua are very much like our founding fathers. Again, something that no one could accept in their right senses. So this is what the United States did in Nicaragua, or did to the people of Nicaragua. Now, Pinter says, it wasn't as if the Sandinistas were perfect. They had their own share of violence and arrogance and so on, but at least they really did do a lot of good in Nicaragua. They were rational, they were civilized, unlike the Contras, and they wanted to establish a stable, decent, pluralistic society, one which gave representation to every ethnic group in Nicaragua. They abolished the death penalty. Then many peasants, the very poor peasants, were brought back from the verge of total ruin. Many families were given titles to land so that they became landholders. And they built many schools. There was a big campaign to improve literacy in Nicaragua. And free education was established. They gave a lot of impetus to a free health service, as a result of which infant mortality came down, polio was eradicated, and ultimately they did a lot of good, the Sandinista government. But the United States naturally could not tolerate this leftist-leaning government, and they saw to it that the Sandinista government was ousted by the Contras. And what did they say at the end of it all? That they had succeeded in making democracy prevail. And this act of theirs, destroying the country and finally justifying whatever they had done by saying that they did everything to protect democracy. This was something that they followed not just in Nicaragua but in other parts of the world too. So Pinter says the United States was responsible for almost every right-wing dictatorship in various parts of the world, in Greece, in Indonesia, Uruguay, the Philippines, Guatemala, El Salvador. In all these countries, you can see the way American intervention made life terrible for the people. This map just indicates the interventions of America in different parts of the world, and in all these places they succeeded in establishing a right-wing military kind of dictatorship. And what happened in Chile, says Pinter, in 1973, is something that can never be forgiven. In Chile, again, you have the popular leader Salvador Allende. And because of his socialist leanings, he was somebody that the Americans just could not tolerate in a country that, again, they had set their sights on. So they gave a lot of support to a leader named Augusto Pinochet. Now, Pinochet was a brutal dictator, somebody who can be compared to Hitler in Germany, or Pol Pot, Cambodia, Pol Pot, Nepal. And, this was the kind of dictator that America sponsored and supported. They made them grow roots in Chile, and the country faced a terrible period under the military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Pinter says thousands lost their lives in these countries, but no one speaks about that because the truth has been very successfully erased by the Americans. It is as a result of which it is as if nothing has ever happened. Even while it was happening, we didn't know that it was happening, or it was conveyed as if it didn't matter. So, the crimes of the United States have been systematic, constant, vicious, and remorseless. The cruelest crimes possible. But very few people actually talk about the crimes committed by America. And that is why Pinter says you have to hand it to America. They have been so clever and successful in the way they have manipulated, themselves into power worldwide. And they masquerade, they put on an act as if they are doing it for universal goodness. It is a brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis. The whole world is hypnotized into believing that the American atrocities are for the good of the world. In this kind of situation where America has the freedom to do whatever it wants and is hardly criticized by anyone else, Pinter believes that we have lost our moral sensibility. We do not anymore have a conscience, because if we did have a conscience, we would simply not let America do all that it has been doing in different parts of the world. We would particularly not allow America to have a prison named the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, a prison that houses or imprisons imprisons war criminals, who end up in prison without even getting a fair trial. So, this kind of inhuman practice where the prisoners are housed without allowing them a free trial, and where they are treated in the most brutal, most inhuman manner possible. The fact that this is going on is a total flouting of international conventions like the Geneva Convention, which has set down specific rules with regard to international relations. But it is as if America is above all these rules. അമേരിക്കയ്ക്ക് വേറെ ഒരു നയം. The rest of the world cannot even protest against that. So the prison, the Guantanamo Bay, is proof of that kind of power that the United States has. And what about the media? Does it ever highlight the inhumanity of Guantanamo Bay? Hardly ever. Even if something is written about it in the newspapers, it would be some small item in maybe page 6 or 7, or never would it be given front page importance. And at the time that the speech was made by Pinter, he says that there were many in the prison, including British residents, and some of them went on a hunger strike. These prisoners in Guantanamo Bay went on a hunger strike in protest against the American atrocities. Now, what about that? They are being force fed. They are, they are being treated in the most brutal manner, but there is no word uttered against it, even by the British Foreign Secretary or the British Prime Minister. You have British prisoners there, but even the authorities in Britain are silent about it. Why? Because the United States has that kind of control over Britain. Pinter believes that Britain, his own country, Britain, is just a puppet in the hands of the United States. And that is what is depicted in that cartoon where you have the president, George Bush, playing with strings and thereby controlling the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair. And the Americans will never tolerate any kind of resistance, any kind of complaint against them, because they have made the whole world believe that if their conduct in Guantanamo Bay is criticized, that is an unfriendly act. So nobody wants to be in the bad books of the United States. Nobody wants sanctions to be imposed against them by the United States. Therefore, everyone tries to be in the good books of America. Tony Blair shuts up. No one protests against whatever America has been doing. Pinter now comes back to the case of Iraq and says how the American attack on Iraq was just like a bandit act. It was just like an act of state terrorism, and there was absolutely no respect for international law when America attacked Iraq. And it was conveyed through a series of lies and kind of manipulation of the media, as a result of which the public was made to believe that the kind of military and economic control that America had over the Middle East was a kind of liberation. It was something that would liberate the people of Iraq and also save the rest of the world. Pinter says that it was just a big lie. And as a result of the terrible military force that was unleashed in Iraq by America, you had the unfortunate death of countless Iraqis, innocent people. And beyond the death, there were also, beyond the deaths, there were so many who were very badly wounded. They were mutilated, their bodies were wounded in the worst possible manner. The thousands of innocents who lost their lives and their bearings. And all of this, ultimately when the reign of Saddam Hussein was finished, the Americans celebrated it. They turned a blind eye to all the destruction that they had brought into Iraq. Look at the pictures there. Destruction ഒന്നും നോക്കാതെ they just celebrated this victory and they trumpeted it aloud as a return to freedom and democracy in the Middle East. So America has been nothing less than a mass murderer in various parts of the world, but nobody accuses them of being mass murderers. And therefore Pinter asks, any etra pera kollanam, how many more people do you have to kill in order to be branded as a war criminal? And he says, nobody. It's as if the International Criminal Court of Justice does not have any power at all. It does not, because America is not a member of that convention, whereby the International Criminal Court of Justice functions. It has very cleverly not become a part of that agreement. They have not ratified the International Criminal Court of Justice. So whatever happens, America would never be held responsible. They would never have to face a trial. They would never have to be answerable for any destruction, any act of destruction in any part of the world. Britain, however, is a member of that convention. It is a part of the International Criminal Court of Justice. So, for all that Britain does in partnership with America, whatever America did in countries like Iraq, they had the firm support of Britain in those acts. So Pinter says that a country like Britain, which is a part of the International Criminal Court of Justice, will have to face prosecution. And in a humorous way, he says we can give the address of the person who's responsible for this. That person lives in number 10 Downing Street, London. That is, of course, the official residence of the British Prime Minister. Now, the situation is that there is so much of calamity that has happened in Iraq as a result of the American intervention. So many, many, many deaths. But it is as if death is irrelevant here. They do not even talk about it. Neither Bush nor Blair even acknowledge the fact that so many people have died. They put it on the back burner. They don't give it any attention at all. At least 100,000 Iraqis were killed by American bombs and missiles before the operation in Iraq. These people are of no moment at all. It is as if their deaths don't even exist. When the American response to the death of the innocents was captured so well in a remark that was made by the American General Tommy Franks. He was a commander of the American army in Iraq, and somebody asked him about the number of people who had lost their lives, and he just said, "We don't do body counts." A most insensitive remark. മരിച്ചതോ അത് നമ്മളുടെ ഒരു കൺസേൺ അല്ല എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ we don't do body counts. A very shocking statement made by the American leader. Pinter now specifically attacks Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, for his involvement in the war in Iraq. He invites our attention to a photograph that had appeared in some British newspapers, which showed Tony Blair, a very handsome and smiling Tony Blair, kissing a little Iraqi boy. This was taken during one of his visits to Iraq, and he had visited schools, because it was in schools that they could meet youngsters, the younger generation, whom they could convince that what they were doing was a good, noble act, that the war was for the good of the Iraqis. So it was in that context that he went to the school. He was welcomed with flowers, and then he very generously lifted a little Iraqi boy and kissed him on his cheek. And this was a good PR work for the British Prime Minister. But around the same time, there were other boys who met with a different kind of end. There were many young children who died. There were many young children who were mutilated, who were injured by the bomb blast and who had lost their limbs. Kayyum, Kalam, Oka Nashtapetta. They were, facing hell in hospitals. No newspaper ever carried a photograph of Blair kissing or showing any kind of concern at all for such people. A grateful child in the Parna kissed in the photo, the newspapers very happily published, but not that of the severely wounded children. It is as if they did not want to acknowledge the fact that so many were dying and so many were being wounded, because അത് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അവരുടെ റോൾ ക്ലിയർ ആവും. ആൻഡ് ഇൻ എ വെരി metaphoric manner, Pinter says, who likes to have blood on your shirt? Blood is dirty. It dirties your shirt and tie when you're making a sincere speech on television. On television, you want to appear as an angel, dressed in spotless white. You have a perfect image. ആ ഇമേജിൽ ഒരു തുള്ളി രക്തം പോലും കാണാൻ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇഷ്ടമില്ല. Therefore, Tony Blair, George Bush, and others just ignored the ones who were injured and the ones who died. Even in their own armies, they did not acknowledge the death of even the American soldiers. They were just the bodies of these soldiers who died during the war were simply transported to some graves and nobody got to know about it because they did not want the world to know that they had lost their own soldiers. The funerals were conducted in a secretive manner and nobody ever talked about any of those people who died. The dead and the mutilated simply rot away in different kinds of graves. And even after the war in Iraq ended, did the United States give up? Not at all. It just spread its military presence to other areas all over the world. And to strengthen itself, it just keeps piling up weapons, more and more weapons. The biggest budgetary allocation in the United States is for defense. And Great Britain is also not far behind. They have also been piling up weapons one after the other and becoming nuclear superpowers. The United States has developed a new system of nuclear force known as bunker busters, very powerful bombs which can destroy whole bunkers of the enemy territories. And Pinter asks, who are they aiming at? Are they aiming at, America and Britain together? Are they aiming at Osama bin Laden? It could be Osama bin Laden today. It could be you and me tomorrow. Or it could even be Joe Dokes. Joe Dokes is an imaginary character. America would even do that. Or imaginary enemy undakita. We are doing this to protect democracy in the parayum, and the whole world will believe that. Or are they heading towards China or Paris? Who is their target? Who knows? What we do know is that this infantile insanity, it's like a madness that has gripped America, like a little child who wants to collect as many toys as possible. The United States wants to possess as many number of nuclear weapons as possible. And that is at the heart of the American political philosophy at the moment, says Pinter. We must remind ourselves that the United States is on a permanent military footing and shows no sign of relaxing it. Yuddham ennadana America's priority. It just wants to control the rest of the world and be the superpower with its military might. Pinter says that many Americans have had enough. They've just had enough of war and they want these military exercises of the United States to end. But they have not been able to voice it loudly enough. അവരുടെ ശബ്ദം ആരും കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല. Even the ones who want the wars to end, they cannot be heard well. And therefore, this is not likely to end at all. America will just continue to attack other nations and be the military superpower that it is. And at this point, he makes a kind of humorous remark. He says, President Bush, who's seen in the photograph there, George Bush, he has many good speech writers, but for a change, let me volunteer. ഞാൻ ഒരു speech അങ്ങോട്ട് എഴുതി കൊടുക്കാം. And this is what he would like to say. And Pinter makes up an imaginary speech, which he says is, the kind of thing that George Bush would say. And ഇതായിരിക്കും ആ speech. He says, God is good. God is great. God is good. My God is good. Bin Laden's good. God is bad. His is a bad God. Saddam's God was bad, except he didn't have one. He was a barbarian. We're not barbarians. We don't chop other people's heads off. We believe in freedom. It's just like nonsense. You keep saying the same thing over and over again, and you are convinced that you are good and everyone else is bad. എൻ്റെ ദൈവം നല്ലത്, മറ്റുള്ളവരുടെ ദൈവം മോശം. എൻ്റെ റിലിജൻ നല്ലത്, മറ്റുള്ളവരുടെ റിലിജൻ മോശം. He says we don't chop people's heads off. They kept saying that the Iraqis, people like Saddam Hussein are barbarians. അവർ മറ്റുള്ളവരുടെ തല വെട്ടും. യുണൈറ്റഡ് സ്റ്റേറ്റ്സ് വേറെ രീതിയിൽ തലവെട്ടുന്നതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് they would never speak about that. He says, we believe in freedom and God also believes in freedom. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഞങ്ങളും ദൈവവും തുല്യമാണ്. That is the kind of stand that they take. I'm not a barbarian. I'm the democratically elected leader of a freedom-loving democracy. They talk so much about freedom, they talk so much about democracy, but ഇതേ ഫ്രീഡമും ഇതേ ഡെമോക്രസിയും വേറെ രാജ്യങ്ങളിൽ അവർ സമ്മതിക്കില്ല. They do not let other countries enjoy their freedom and their democracy. He says, we are a compassionate society. നമ്മൾ വളരെ ദയാശീലരാണ്. We give compassionate electrocution and compassionate lethal injection. It's a very sarcastic statement. He says, ഞങ്ങൾ വളരെ ദയാശീലരായിട്ടാണ് electrocution and lethal injection. വേറെ ആൾക്കാരെ കൊല്ലുന്നത്, we are doing that out of kindness. We are a great nation. I'm not a dictator. This sounds exactly like the kind of speech that a Hitler would have made. Remember the speech made by Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator. അതേപോലെയുള്ള ഒരു സ്പീച്ചാണ്. He says, I'm not a dictator. He is. Saddam Hussein is a dictator. I'm not a barbarian. He is. And he is. They all are. I possess moral authority. He believes that he has the authority to do whatever he wants to do. You see this fist? Mushti churti, he folds his fist and says, this is my moral authority and don't you forget it. He gives himself the moral authority to attack others. We now come to the last part of the speech where Pinter speaks about the very important role that a writer can play in the world today. The role that a writer can play to protest against the atrocities like the ones being unleashed by the United States of America. He says, the writer lives in a very precarious position. A writer's life is highly vulnerable. The writer is exposed to so much of danger because എന്ത് എഴുതിയാലും അതിനെ question ചെയ്യാൻ there are people waiting out there. If you criticize the government will target you and silence you. So it's like a naked activity. You're so exposed. നമ്മൾ ഒരു ബോംബ് വർഷത്തിന് മുന്നിൽ പോയി നിൽക്കുന്ന പോലെയാണ്. It's like a naked activity. You don't have to weep about that. The writer makes his choice. But even if it is a very dangerous activity, he says, there is nothing to weep about that. Because it's a choice that the writer makes. ഞാൻ പ്രതികരിക്കും, ഞാൻ എഴുതും. I will speak against inhumanity. It is a choice that the writer makes. It is true to say that you're open to all the winds, some of them extremely icy. You will be, in a very, very difficult situation. You may be on your own, out on a limb. There is no protection, there is no shelter. Shelter and protection will come only when you lie. അതായത് സത്യം തുറന്ന് പറയാതെ if you support the criminals, you will get a lot of protection. You will get a lot of shelter. But in which case, of course, you have constructed your own protection and it could be argued you become a politician. But the moment you utter lies and support the cruel people, then you yourself become one among them. Politicians, തെറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന പൊളിറ്റീഷ്യനെ നിങ്ങൾ എന്ന് സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നു, that moment you become a politician yourself. So the difference between a writer and a politician. A writer is brave and stands for the truth. The politician stands for falsehood. And Pinter believes that in spite of all the adversities, in spite of all the disadvantages and the dangers that um, writers face, fierce intellectual determination to define the real truth of our lives is a crucial obligation which devolves upon us all. It is a responsibility, he says, of the writers to hold up the truth. സത്യത്തിന് വേണ്ടി നിലപാടെടുക്കുക. Fight for the truth and convey the truth to the people. That is the greatest moral responsibility of writers. He says it is mandatory. It is a compulsory thing. ഇതിൽ നിന്ന് നമ്മൾക്ക് ഒഴിഞ്ഞു മാറാൻ പറ്റില്ല. So we need to stand for the truth and convey the truth to the people. And if we do not have that kind of determination in a political vision, then we can never hope to restore that which we are nearly losing. That is the dignity of man. Human beings in a dignity, that is something that can be protected, and it can be protected best by the writers. They are the ones who can most effectively question any kind of inhuman act. Wherever there is injustice, a writer can speak against it. And it is by speaking against injustice that a writer can protect the dignity of humanity.